system that bases everything on money. Each one of us, you and I, are cogs in a wheel. When they get ready to get rid of us, they bring somebody else and you thought you were great at what you did, and tomorrow, if you get sick, they're gonna bring somebody else and put them in your chair. So everything is in this society is based on its financial value. So sometimes what makes people most uncomfortable in the capitalist system is when things of value are destroyed.
Right.
And to an extent, you want to make people uncomfortable. Now, I'm not encouraging and advocating that. I'm just saying that people have to be uncomfortable. It cannot be very peaceful. And the difficulty with a situation like this of having one leader orchestrate everything is that we're in different cities who have experienced things differently. Baltimore, from the Freddie Gray situation, is in a post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. We're like soldiers who came home from Vietnam who are trying to psychologically get our balance back while we're dealing with a consent decree and then this. And the reason why this may touch us differently in Baltimore than it would someone in Butte, Montana, is because we're saying that we are not even over that trauma. Mm-hmm. And any second now, what the killing of Mr. Floyd indicate is that any second now we could be back there. So we are likely to react differently than they do in a state that haven't experienced that trauma.
Sure.
In Ferguson, there's a different feeling. In New York, where they were Eric Garner, we're seeing New York out of control, but they're still in the post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. It's funny, we can psychologically analyze and understand behavior when people have been in combat zones, how they have to, it takes a while for them to get back stable, except with Black people. When we go through tremendous trauma, as we had gone here in Baltimore, the Gun Trace Task Force, where you had officers selling drugs and robbing people,
sure.
and the whole unit. I'm not even talking about 2 or 3 bad officers.
Right.
They killed the one bad apple syndrome, because the whole unit is in prison for 20-some years.
Yep.
People are still looking at that. People are still dealing with the murders that are occurring on the streets of Baltimore, which they want to help the police solve, but they're afraid of both the cops and the robbers.
Sure.
So when you can't go to the cops and point out who the bad guy is because the bad guy may be associated with the cop, and you know that's true because you just had the Gun Trace Task Force, but you're psychologically unstable.
Sure.
And so you're not going to have a very stable protest when you go to a protest. You're angry. Bill said it best. You're angry anyway. You don't want to break a window just because I'm out of control. Why would they break that window? Angry people break things. If you've ever been angry in your home, even with your mate, instead of physically dealing with them, you go break a glass or something, or put a hole in the wall. And then all of a sudden, when they come to these protests, we try to say, well, that's not logical of how they do it. The logical thing would be, and our retort to that is, fix the thing that started the fire in the first place. And you don't have to worry about whether it's an organized or disorganized protest. There will be no protest. Right. If Mr. Flood is not killed begging for his mother, who is already deceased, do you know how much pain you've got to be in when you're not even asking for help for someone who's living?
Exactly.
You're seeing your mother. Can you imagine for him to call for his mother? He's seeing every childhood memory. Wow. He is seeing the face of his mother who's deceased. Wow. He went to his mother's funeral, and he's still in so much pain that he's calling for a person that he knows is deceased because he went to her funeral. Wow. Do you know how much pain? If you wanna have order, then stop that disorder. That is the most out of order disorder. That's more out of order than looting, than breaking glass, than starting fires. To have a man calling for his deceased mother.
Yeah. Wow.
Not even his mother who's standing in the crowd, but his deceased mother. Again, finally, I'm going to keep coming back to this, and I'm coming back to this with everyone who I'm talking to, is the permanency this time. The protests, the pacification programs can't work. History dictates it didn't work in Vietnam because the North Vietnamese said, we don't want to pacify, we want to milk. When this thing is over, even if the officer, all of them are convicted, we're saying that if all of them are convicted and one of our children is killed 4 months from now, then even though these officers were convicted, we really haven't come up with any permanent solutions. No. We need to be looking at saying there's some permanency. And everybody don't have to do that. The young people and other people can go out and do the protest, but the people of us who are in this field have to be the one now who are writing papers, white papers, who are writing to politicians, who are contacting our sources in the police departments. Here, I was anticipating, or I had an idea that the front leaders in this mayoral race may have been Sheila Dixon and Brand. So I reached out to both of them and say, look, let me tell you, I don't care whether you win, lose, or draw. Here's some things that, and both of them communicated back to me. So while I'm not necessarily out there with everyone else, even though I think that's still a good idea, the fact that I'm doing my part by already telling them here's what the policy should be. And both of them wrote me back, so that's a good idea. I think, can you write something up? Can you see? Because whether they win, lose, or draw, in anticipation of them, I already got to get them moving in the right direction. Because I told them today, I said, no matter who wins the mayorship of Baltimore, we don't have any time for any inauguration or any celebration. You just got to go to work. Sometimes you have time for that. If the young people are foregoing their graduation because of this pandemic, you're going to have to forego your celebration because of the pandemic of racism that has led to this kind of brutality, and we have to get to work. And I think that too will send a message to the people. Sure. So I'm asking the people who are listening, who have a particular set of skills, along with along with our analysis of what happened, along with us looking at the process to begin to look at some permanency and let that be our legacy. Even after we're gone, let the legacy be that Mike Blow real policy for the police department that made sure that this didn't happen again, and the police department accepted it. So even when he have taken his final sleep, his policy is keeping another person from becoming Mr. George Floyd.
Wow. Well, Doc, as always, that image, and you know, and I was sharing with Thinbad earlier in the week. You know, as a former deputy chief, and I was chief of patrol, I've seen a lot of things in my career. You know, as you have, Doc, in the state police and the FBI. I've seen distress. I've seen good stuff. I've seen homicide scenes. I've seen people with no eyes and teeth, and you know, everything that you could possibly imagine. And I'm being very candid with you when I tell you that I could not watch that whole video. I still haven't been able to watch the whole thing because I had already heard before I started watching it that Mr. Floyd was calling out for his mother. And as I got through that, as I was starting to get through the first 4 minutes of watching this guy stepping on his neck or kneeling on his neck, and I could see the death coming over him, and you know, I couldn't watch it anymore. And you're right, Doc, that image of calling a dead relative is something that'll resonate in my mind for a long time. But you know what also bothered me was when I looked at that guy's face. I'm not even going to call him officer because he was a disgrace to the badge. But when I looked at his face, and Craig Knight and Councilman Creer out here kind of found that thing I was looking for. I said, what does that look saying? And, you know, he was kind of looking at the camera, and he knew he was being taped, you know, because people were saying, hey, man, he can't breathe. And, you know, they walked around with cameras. But he kind of looked at the camera as if to say, hey, this is what I do. You know, that was kind of the look that you saw there. And that look still is embedded in my mind. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to get out of my mind. Yes, sir.
Think about that, Mike. I mean, usually, even as children, and we are not what we, you know, when we were children, we were very immature, right?
Yes.
To an extent. But when we were doing something wrong, we keep saying, I better cut this out because somebody coming. You have to have a police department with a different kind of culture for you to do that for 9 minutes and saying that a supervisor may be coming, a lieutenant, a captain, I better ease up in case somebody else show up. But when you're willing to do it for that long, you're saying that the entire police department, the culture is, I don't even have to be worried about the supervisor showing up because if he or she shows up, they're going to be okay with this.
That's right.
Usually when we know we're doing something wrong, we try to get over it. You know, mama coming down the hall, somebody coming, because you know you're wrong. So at a certain point, even if you're doing something wrong and devious, you stop. In order for you to continue to do it with other police officers there, but beyond other police officers there, with the cameras there, beyond with the cameras there, with the philosophy that a supervisor is en route, because we've got a crowd gathering in one of these offices, and I think you're going to see this during the course of the trial have already asked other people to come here.
Right.
The person who come here may be a captain or a lieutenant, and I'm still going to keep my knee on his neck. Means that you believe that the entire department is accepting of this kind of culture. And I think those are the kind of things we analyze. If you look at the end of that present day, I know you said you haven't watched the same thing. Mm-hmm. When the paramedics get there and they turn him over, a police officer grabs him and rolls him over like he's a piece of trash, and they don't even know he's dead yet. Wow. I mean, an EMT is supposed to move you slowly. You're unconscious, make sure your neck isn't broke.
That's right.
Look at the end of the. I implore you to look at the end of that. They just grab him and flip him over. He may have been still living and had a fractured neck. Watch the end of the video presentation because I'm hoping.
Yes, watch the end of the video. Really do.
Right. If you watch, I'm hoping during the course of this trial, they take it frame by frame because what it says that even after he was completely unconscious and you still had your knee on his neck, another officer wearing a bulletproof vest still walks around, grabs him, not knowing whether he's dead, not the EMT is still injured, and grabs him and rolls him like he's a sack, not worried about what could happen to his neck. And they haven't even declared him dead yet.
Wow.
And
I don't even think the EMT touched him. It was the other officer with the vest on and the gun that flipped him over to the
Sure.
And just grab them. Just watch it. Just grab something like that. You as a deputy chief would look at that. Let's say you're not involved with the prosecution. Mm-hmm. The officers have been fired, and now you've got to look at this tape to make sure for training purposes, your other officers see that what went wrong. Sure. You would look at that piece of it and say, no, I'm not stopping with the knee on the neck. I'm not stopping with his death. I'm not stopping with the people begging him to stop. Look at the end of this. Because you've got to see this is another one of my officers who haven't been charged yet, wearing a vest. He hasn't been charged because he came afterwards, but he still grabbed him and threw him over, and nobody does that. I mean, if you're in a car accident, they say don't move. Right. Let's get something on his neck first.
That's right.
Let's get a collar on his neck. He just grabs him and rolls him over. You got to watch that. So, and I think the states that the district attorney is going to go through that kind of evidence, you would hope, in the end, because it's going to be even more devastating and more graphic than what people are talking about now when they watch the whole thing frame by frame.
Wow. Well, you know, I want to share a couple of comments, and then I want to get some an interesting perspective from you, Shannon, especially, and sort of think about this before I read these comments. You know, one of the things that I've been hearing, and again, when Thinbad and I have been talking about this, is that you've heard a lot of fathers talking about the talk, and we all know what the talk is. And I just wanted to find out, Shannon, from your perspective, have you had the talk with your son, and how is that talk framed as a mother talking to her son about, you know, what's going on and that kind of stuff as you have walked through this? Because I've only heard the perspective on CNN and Fox and all the other places from males who have talked about, I had to have the talk with my son or my nephew. And I just kind of wanted to hear the perspective from a mother that's seeing all this stuff and raising a son in this atmosphere, particularly in an atmosphere, as Doc said, is so charged that people are saying, I'm going out here in the middle of a pandemic and among 4,000 or 5,000 people and make my voice heard. So think about that, and I wanted to share these comments real quick. Angel said that when her dad was a policeman, he's now deceased, they used to do ride-alongs in communities of color and with police officers of color, and she's not sure if this is still done. And then secondly, Ellen says that, I like what Doc said, stop disorder and you will have order. So we'll get back to those comments, but I just wanted to share those before we, got to the point where we were wrapping up. And thank you, Angel and Ellen, for those comments. But Shannon, kind of walk us through that. How has that talk been for you, as opposed to what we've been hearing from the networks who have only talked to the fathers about the conversations they've had with their sons?
It was very difficult, very emotional, because my son is 9 And I think it's a disgrace that I have to have that conversation with him in 2020.